So I want to read to you one of the most alpha accounts of Alexander the Great that I've ever heard about and saw. I'm heading up to Alexandria, and probably after Beowulf, that's what we're going to try and get into on the YouTube channel after. So I'm going to read this excerpt to you. It might take 2 or 3 minutes. You can skip it if you don't want to listen to it, but this is like, seriously, like, what kind of man was Alexander the Great? So I'll read it to you like this. You don't have to see what I'm reading, but it's this section. So, on the third day of the voyage, Alexander received word that the Malians and the Oxydrake, two formidable warlike tribes in the lower Punjab, had agreed to join forces and prevent the Macedonians from traveling through their territory. Alexander sought to meet these peoples individually before they could join forces. In roughly 2 days, he had reached the territory of the Malians, where he disembarked and began operations to pacify, meaning bring to peace, his peace, the region. The final result was the siege of another hilltop fortress, another bloody and dangerous adventure that ultimately found Alexander, the first man over the enemy battlements, wounded by an arrow in the chest. You know what I mean? Like, dude, like, I could read it. I could say it in a way different way with more excitement, but I'll just read it first. Surrounded by Malian warriors and fighting for his life, the Malians were apparently very skilled at cutting or throwing down scaling ladders, and they did so with such a haste that Alexander's men could barely get over the wall to rescue him. When they did and turned the fight in the Macedonians' direction, one man after another was forced to hold his shield over Alexander's prone body as he writhed in pain from his wound. Also, by the way, today, I got a cut at work or whatever, and it it was a pretty decent sized cut. And it made me think of, mortal wounds or like wounds that aren't mortal in like ancient combat. Imagine getting shot in the chest with an arrow and then trying to like fight your way out or like have your men, get you out of there. Like that would be such a like intense situation. Like obviously you didn't get shot near the heart, but anywhere up in here, even lower, like at the sternum, like that blade potentially pierces right through your chest bone or gets decently deep enough to where it's like you got to get that thing out. Oh, man. At last, the Macedonians gained the upper hand, and an all-out slaughter ensued. Men, women, and children fell by raging Macedonian swords. When the fighting ended, Alexander demanded that Perdiccas cut the arrow from his chest, as no doctor was at hand. Perdiccas obliged. As he pulled the barb from Alexander's body, blood rushed from the wound, and the king fainted, some believing he was dead. For several days he could not be moved. There was serious concern among his intimates that he would not survive, so meaning friends. And rumor circulated among the greater part of his army that the king had in fact died, although, as usual, Alexander defied the odds. His fighting days had come to an end. When Alexander was well enough to be moved, albeit by means of a litter, carried around, he had himself carried to the river and shipped downstream to the Macedonian camp at the junction of the Hydroats and the Essenes. When the troops first caught sight of the recumbent Alexander, they thought they were only seeing his corpse, but at last the vessel made its way to the river bank, and the still ailing but defiant Alexander raised his hand and greeted his men. The men in the camp raised shouts of joy. When a party of guards arrived with a stretcher to transport Alexander to his tent, he refused and instead called for his horse. At the sight of Alexander astride a horse once again, there was, according to Arrian, a storm of applause so loud that the river banks and neighboring glens re-echoed with noise. As he rode to his tent, the men blessed him and showed him with wreaths and showered him with wreaths and garlands. As Alexander recovered, the collected wisdom of the army, and probably at this point Alexander himself, was that a return to Persia and perhaps to Babylon would now be in the best interest of all. So, dude never lost a battle, and after getting shot in the chest on top of a tower of people he was trying to pacify, he's like, yeah, I think it'd probably be best to retire or just stop for now. Like, I heard that, I think, 5 years ago or something like that, and I was like, dude, could you imagine? Like, getting shot in the chest, being the first over the wall, while your men are behind you, like, on top of this tower. It's like, the dude probably felt like he was invincible, but then, I mean, you're that close to death, and what do? You know, and, like, it's just kind of amazing to see a king who fights his battles from the front, and the bravery that it produces in his army. And yeah, I think it's very inspiring. I don't agree with everything about the life of Alexander the Great, but one thing I do associate to, you know, God and God's providence, even if he doesn't associate it to it, is bravery. You know, bravery is an attribute of God. God is brave. And, you know, in that way, Alexander the Great was like God. He was very brave. And so you can learn a lot from that man's example. You know, instead of sending men to their deaths without you, you know, even caring, he led men to victory while letting his life, you know, be at risk of death. And his men were willing to die for him. That's a powerful and inspiring leader, in my opinion. Peace.